and the people, of course, this would make sense. The people that are stepping into our church have Ivy League degrees and are, working at these, the big five here in the Bay Area, and just being overwhelmed a little bit with like, what are we doing here? Like, God, why us? With our little education and with our small yes on the table, God, why us? And I would often tell Ben just that they need a shepherd. They need someone to guide them into truth and guide them, because so much of what I would describe in our context, and this is probably describing a lot of progressive cities, is that people just want to create their own value system. They want to pick and choose what they want to believe, and then just kind of form their own way of life, their own rule of life. And I think, one question I'll ask people that I'm getting to know is, how's that working for you?
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I'm so glad you joined us. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe. That way you'll never miss an episode. Well, today we're going to sit down with Shauna Pilgreen. She and her husband, Ben, are church planters in San Francisco. And we're going to talk about planning a church without a playbook, what to do when you're in an area where nobody seems interested in God, and a whole lot more. So whether you're revitalizing a church or you're a church planter yourself, I think you're going to get a lot out of today's conversation. Also, make sure you check out the offers from today's podcast sponsors. Parkhill Architects is really changing the way church buildings are built. A lot of people are focused on community, not just gathering space. They can help you with that. Plus, they work to your budget, not theirs. You can go to parkhill.com/faith or just click the link. And then Gloo Marketplace has got everything you need for your day-to-day ministry, but they'll give it to you with a discount, 20%. So you can click the link below and check out Gloo Marketplace at gloo.us/marketplace. Use the code CAREY20 when you check out. You'll get 20% off your entire order. And now to today's episode with Shauna Pilgreen. Shauna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Carey. I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Well, so am I. We're going to cover a lot. We have a lot of church planters listening, and I think San Francisco is a little bit of a harbinger of what is to come in the rest of the country and the West. You started 13 years ago with a church plant with your husband in San Francisco, and it's a bit of a poster child, I think, for post-Christian culture. Can you describe the culture as you know it in San Francisco, how you experienced it, and then maybe a little bit about how it's changed over the last little while as well?
Yes. Growing up in the South, I didn't grow up on the West Coast. So the city in and of itself was so new and different when we moved here that even today, it still feels like a little bit of a bubble compared to the rest of our state and even to the West Coast. I know we've got a lot of similarities with some urban cities here on the West Coast, but it still feels very much like a bubble in the state. But it's a city also that I've learned to love. It's a city I've learned to love. The nations live here. It's a very transient city. Of course, the pandemic has shaped and changed a lot of this city, but it's a city that celebrates everything. It's a city that tolerates everything, and it's a city that I find myself even a little bit. I'm quick to defend this city as we live here for over a decade. I tend to stand up a lot for the city, and I feel like I've kind of growing in some authority here in this city just because of what I experienced alongside the people here.
So 13 years ago, you're in the middle of the tech boom, which hasn't exactly gone away, but a lot of that has shifted out of California into places like Austin and Texas, to a certain extent different, but Nashville, Florida, et cetera, et cetera. So it's moved away. And not everybody thinks San Francisco is a great place anymore. When you think about receptivity to spirituality, what was it like back around 2010, and how has that changed?
Well, you're right, Carey. San Francisco certainly was a place to move with your ideas. It was a place you could not walk by a coffee shop or a park and not see a group of like-minded people dreaming of the next project, the next product. It was happening all over the city. This was the city to come to be with like-minded people and dream big. And, they would start off at a picnic table, and then it would move into a garage, and then it would move into, office space in the Mission District until they got, a bigger place, that now they would serve all of their meals all day. And, it's become these places like Google and Apple headquarters. So we were stepping into a city at that time where startup mentality, startup culture, startup language, it was thriving here. And so to come in as a church in a place where it was receptive in a sense of we really used a lot of that startup language when we moved here. But today it does look different. Today I can walk down the street and you see some boarded up buildings, and we hear of, I think the most recent exodus was Yelp closing down their space here. And that's happening more and more because remote work is such a draw. And we are seeing places and people leave for that reason. At the same time, it's really encouraging to see just some key stakeholders in the city, not even believers, who are really urging people to move to the city. So AI is really buying up a lot of the leases here.
Oh, really?
Biotech, they're the ones that are kind of coming in now. At the same time, like in what we're even seeing, just even some parallels or even some different realities in the church space is that we've got almost like a completely different church after the pandemic, just who God's bringing in. We lost a lot of people to Austin and other places.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just they left church, they left the city, right? And the state.
They did. But we're seeing a whole new group of people come in, a lot of young professionals.
Yeah. Talk about the spiritual climate. I've spent some time in Silicon Valley over the years and have done some talks there, but haven't really spent a lot of time. Some of my friends who live there say that it's always been a little bit hostile to Christianity. Like it's okay to be spiritual, not cool to be Christian. Is that true? Was that true when you planted? Has that changed?
When we moved here, I definitely felt like we stuck out. And what we were seeking to do felt very foreign and very unwelcomed. And a lot of it is we didn't know the people yet. We knew the mentality. We knew the spiritual climate was cold at best. We knew no one was asking for a church to come in. There was no red carpet. So we definitely felt like we moved into a place that was not wanting us. And I think as we even still engage in conversations with other pastors and leaders in the Bay Area, they feel that too. But as we really kind of keep our head to the ground in the sense of like, who does want to be here and who wants to help change the climate here in Silicon Valley, we're really just seeing a growing number of churches, a growing number of even Christian networks. And what gives me hope and what excites me is when you hear, even on a Sunday, even the buzz, even in our church, is who's having conversations with who, how are different startups helping other startups, and really just seeing, and a big value even here at Epic is to see vocation being sacred and for faith to figure out how do we take faith into the workplace. And I can say that in 13 years, we've seen a lot of changes, more churches being started, which leads to more believers in the city. It's so encouraging. I think in the first few years, it felt like a revolving door at our church where people were coming in and they were only here for a short time. And 13 years in, we're really seeing people put their roots down and stay and kind of live with this determination of, I believe that not only can I live out my faith in this city, but I can allow my faith to make a difference in the workspaces.
What was your philosophy of church planting when you got to the Bay Area?
I laugh a little bit because, so much of it was, we're going to do the best we can. And I think we had this in the back of our mind. Okay, if this does not work, we did not burn any bridges in coming here, and we can go back to where we came from. And again, we said that because, Carey, it's not like we had a playbook. It's not like we had dozens of churches that were thriving in San Francisco, it definitely felt like we were going into the unknown. We were pioneering, but our calling was so compelling that we were willing to go for it. We were willing to take the risk. And so I think a lot of our mindset, I know that might not sound spiritual or godly, but a lot of our mindset just had to do with, we believe this is of God, and let's take some risk and let's see what happens.
So what did you do? How did you establish? Did you start small? Did you try to launch big? And what was your approach to actually engage people, particularly because you were transplants and you didn't know a lot of people? What did you do in those first few years?
We did as much as we could on the front end before we moved here. Whether that was, raising $1 million to move out here, studying and researching as much as we could about the culture before we got out here. We brought a team with us. Ben made multiple visits to the city. I brought the kids out several times. So we did as much as we could on the front end before we moved here. But again, we didn't know a whole lot of, not only a lot of people in the city, we didn't even know a lot of believers or churches that were here. So much of it really came from figuring this out on the daily with our feet here and planted here. And it sounds so simple as I look back on it, so elementary, and even in some ways hidden in what maybe was working in other parts of the country. But it was just literally, hey, today, God, who are you going to cross my path with? Who are the people of peace that we can find in this city? And it was a slow start in the sense of relational building. At the same time, we had a timeline. Like our goal was to grow a launch team over the summer. And we did preview services once a month, October, November, December, and January. And then in February 2011, we launched weekly in a hotel space. And so we had a timeline, which kept us accountable and kept us, created some momentum. But at the same time, I think when we just look back on the daily, it seemed like a slow process in building relationships here.
Did you launch big? Did you launch small? How did that work, building a core?
Yeah, so our launch team, I think I'm even picturing like a picture that we took our last launch team meeting before we launched weekly. I think we had maybe 35 people in our living room.
Wow.
13 of those moved out here with us. And when I say 13, 5 of those were kids.
Okay.
And so I remember, we launched with a group of 35. But I think even in our first few services, and we had over 200 people, now some of that number was some church plants in the Bay Area that said, hey, we're going to send our volunteers to help staff the nursery and staff the production booth and help greet at the doors. But while all of those people were not believers, they were interested enough to say, hey, we'd be curious to see what it's like, what's going on here. And we had some people that even showed up at our launch team meetings that maybe, again, had some church history in their background, or they moved here with some understanding of who Jesus is and couldn't find a church in the area. But yeah, it was an interesting go. I would say, it looks like we launched large with 200 people.
Yeah, that's a great launch, particularly in in the Bible Belt, it's a great launch, but in San Francisco, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were some of the mistakes you made in the first few years of church planting?
The first few that even just come to my mind were the conversations that we would have with people as they came into our living room and as we tried to serve food. I remember during our launch team days, we would meet often on Sundays. And initially we would set out, of course, church planting on a budget, we would buy styrofoam cups. And I remember those first few meetings were like, why is no one drinking the tea and coffee that we have sitting out? Only to learn like styrofoam is a big no-no in our city. So that being
can you explain for those who may still not understand why it's a no-no, what the problem was?
Yeah, they're just not biodegradable. Yep. You cannot recycle styrofoam. You cannot compost styrofoam.
Sounds like Canada. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was a lot of it. I think another mistake we made, again, I told you about, we were having a friend of a friend. Again, you're just looking for any warm-blooded person to come in and join your team. And I remember we had a friend of a friend. She was Jewish. She was a lesbian. She was a public school teacher. And I was so delighted I'm sure I probably served a good Southern casserole to her. Yeah. And I just remember like she couldn't eat anything that I had served, and just thinking, I'm probably making more mistakes than I am.
Because it was like friends. Dairy and gluten and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's just not kosher. Yeah.
Oh, and not kosher. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I was losing on all kinds of levels. I remember just even but at the same time, as I think about these mistakes, I also just think about like how God taught us things through those mistakes and how real we were in those mistakes. And I think it requires this posture of, hey, we're going to mess up as we figure this out. And we did a lot of that.
Yeah. Any other things if you had a do-over? Like one of the challenges is great to start with 200 people. But I think Rich Birch and Tony Morgan and others, I mean, there's sort of a rule out there that whatever your core group is, you'll probably settle at triple that core group. So if you launch with 75 volunteers, you'll settle with about 200 people at worship, just over 200. If you have 30, you'll settle at about 100 in worship. Would you have rebuilt the volunteer core differently? Would you have fundraised differently? I think those two little things, they sound small, but yeah, you end up in a culture clash pretty quickly where I can see by the code there, it would be like, wow, environmentally insensitive, not thoughtful about guests, etc. Any other things that you would go back and say, knowing what we know now, we might have approached this differently?
I think I would tell myself that it is going to be a slow build, Shauna. It is going to be a slow build, but let that slow build strengthen the church and strengthen the trust that we were seeking to build in our city, instead of thinking that if we don't do this fast and if we don't do it the way of the city, we're going to lose. And I think having to hold that tension of we're doing something that goes against our city beliefs, our cultural beliefs that are rooted in our city, I think we had to continue to navigate that fine line of we want to be winsome in our approach. We want you here. And at the very beginning, again, I said we were welcoming anybody that was interested in volunteering in coming to our church. We would meet with anybody. We had people over in our home all the time, people who were just curious about what we were doing. We were having our neighbors over who were wondering, like, can you just explain this to me? What's a church planter? But I would go back and do all of those all over again. I think it helped us strengthen our story of why we were called here. I think it helped us build this foundation of this is God's church in His city for His people. And we kept the long game in mind, Carey. We really did. As I mentioned, we knew we could always go back, but we tried not to look back too much. We knew we were determined and we wanted to make this work in our city. We wanted this to be a gift to our city, and it was just going to require a lot of learning.
Remind me where home was for you and for Ben.
Yeah, so I grew up in Georgia, Ben grew up in Louisiana. Our last place of ministry was in Missouri. So yes, San Francisco was not something we were accustomed to.
Yeah. So it sounds like you brought a Southern hospitality to San Francisco, and styrofoam and intolerances notwithstanding, it seems to have worked. But you said something that I want to drill down on a little bit more. We came in with a belief system that our city was against. And I think more and more people are running into that reality right now. Yeah, you got the incubator a decade and a half ago in San Francisco, but there's a lot of people planting churches, even in the Bible Belt, trying to reach younger millennials, Gen Z, who are like, yeah, they're not buying what we're sharing. They're not into it. So how did you crack that code? Like, obviously, I've been on your website. I haven't been to your church, but I've been to your website. It's a thriving, large church now. Like, you've had a lot of fruit and success over the last 13 years. So it's obviously working. But how did you crack that nut where the very thing that was to the core of your being was something that your city didn't believe and was probably against?
Yeah, Carey, I mean, even this past Sunday, we had 750 people at our 3 gatherings in person.
Incredible.
So, again, I'm speaking from a place of God's abundance. When it felt like at the very beginning, it was a little bit of scarcity. And our vision statement at Epic is to see an increasing number of people in San Francisco orient their entire lives around Jesus. And I think we just had to anchor to this is who God is, and this was what He's called us to do. And this city needs the presence of a church. And so just holding on to that, letting God build it from there. And again, not that we've done it perfectly, but I think even just asking that question is like, how would Jesus live here in San Francisco? Because the truth is, what worked in the places that we had done ministry prior were not going to work here. And we were still orthodox in our beliefs, but the methods and the ways that we sought to invite people and teach scriptures was not going to work in San Francisco like it worked in other places. So I think we really quickly had to get rid of those methods and means of doing it, and really learn, again, just to become a student of our culture and to gain trust in our city. I think awareness and attentiveness are just crucial. I think for anyone who's planting in hard places and planting in what they would describe a progressive city, I think awareness and attentiveness is just crucial to the lives of believers. At the same time, Carey, we've been shaped by our city. Yes, it's a city that that in a sense, we live very counterculturally. We've been shaped by this city, and we want to be who Jesus is. And for Him to be who forms us the most. But I think it's still okay and even good for us to be shaped by the place where we live. And I think because of that, over time, people have actually been, this might surprise you, but what we thought was an oddity in moving out here, of being a family of 5 from the Midwest, uprooting and moving far from home, actually resonates and is fresh to the people here. So many people live here that have moved from all over the world. Most people are transplants. They're not from here. They live far from home. And I think even, back in those days of trying to get 3 kids on a stroller to the grocery store, I stuck out like a sore thumb. But at the same time, I look back at that and I think, hopefully it was refreshing to people to see, hey, while there are more dogs than kids in the city, this family, for whatever reason, is choosing to put their roots down here and make a difference here. And I think even in the beginning, because we were learning so much, I don't feel like we had as much to give as we do now. And 13 years in, we're just at a place where we have so much more to give to our city, so much that we can serve our city with, more resources than we can give our city. Obviously, we've got a mass of people that gather here on a Sunday that then go out into the workplace in our city. So things have changed, but I still really just give a lot of credit to that slow build in the beginning. Not ever knowing, is the church going to take off? Is it going to be a church that truly blesses the city? A church that the city would even recognize? I mean, just a few weeks ago, we have a very large park near us at home. It hosts the Moscone Center. This is where Apple releases all their products every year. They hold conferences, global conferences, but they just named one of our staff on their board. A dream come true, something where just trust has gained and grown. We've got an under-resourced elementary school in our neighborhood. So the city is only 7 by 7. We're small. But we're made up of all kinds of neighborhoods. And in the Selma neighborhood, south of Market, where our church sits, the very first offering at our church, 100% of it went to just be a blessing to the school in our neighborhood. And I tell you 2 stories out of that. One, we had a couple that was visiting our church Golden Gate Seminary used to be here in the Bay Area. They've since moved to Southern California. But there was a couple that was studying seminary there, and they came to that first service. And it was because of that generosity moment of our church. And again, we were being sustained financially from, I think we had like 13 to 17 churches around the country that were supporting us. So we took our little bit of offering that we were given that day and we gave it to a school. And it made a difference for that couple that were visiting, seminary students. And today she has started a Christian school in our city, and he's our executive pastor at our church.
Wow.
So just the difference it made in their lives. And then just a few weeks ago, we baptized a school teacher from that school. This school is still a local partner of ours. So some things change and some things just grow trust over time.
How has the city shaped you? You've said that a couple of times.
Yeah. I know it's shaping me when I travel and I see the difference between where I live and what looks maybe like the places I lived growing up. And I can't even, Carey, even sometimes I'll even listen to a worship song, and the only picture in my mind are the people of our city, the streets of our city. And so when I say it's shaped me, it's in me. The city is in me to my core. And I've had to learn to love this place. Loving a progressive city, a hard to reach city, a city that doesn't love you in return takes time. It takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of, just being willing to learn and to ask questions. And while I certainly don't agree with everything in this city has rubbed off on me, I think, and a lot of this I've learned just through doing Alpha and leading Alpha here in our city, is just having this posture of, I know who I am in Christ. And because I know who I am in Christ, I know who I want to be for you. And what I give you, I want to give as a blessing to you. And so our city it's a friendly city. It's a city that it's okay to make mistakes here. It's a city almost that welcomes that and thrives off of that. It's a city that values innovation and invention. It's a city that makes space for a lot of things. And so, yes, I'm rooted and grounded in Christ, but I think for the people in my city to see that I care for them, they need to know that it's not me just coming and I only have something to give them, but they have something to give me.
Yeah, I could take this in a couple of different directions, but I think that's a really intriguing perspective that you offer. I mean, I'm reminded of what Tim Keller said, that Christians these days seem to run away from cities that they don't agree with and build little enclaves where everybody agrees with them and thinks like them and acts like them and talks like them. And he said, historically, Christians have run into cities, not away from them. And so kudos to you and Ben and your whole team for doing that. I want to talk about spiritual receptivity. You know, thinking about Keller, he said he had to iterate 3 times, shift the way he brought the message. At first, it's, almost, and I'm paraphrasing poorly here, but this isn't your parents' church. And then it was, how's work working for you? Your idols are disappointing you. And then in one of my interviews with him a couple of years before he died, he talked about, if he was starting over again, he'd talk about identity, because identity is everything right now, whether that's sexual identity, your identity politically, etc., and contrast that to our identity in Christ. So he had to learn to speak the language of New York as the language of New York evolved. In the decade and a half that you've had roughly in San Francisco, have you seen the dialogue evolve at all of how San Franciscans are thinking about faith, spirituality? Are you seeing more openness, more hostility, more closedness? And then how are you pivoting the message of translating Jesus in the midst of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I've been thinking about, wrestling with, writing on, studying, having conversations with, not just even with the unbelievers, but even figuring out as people are moving in. I'm always learning from someone. Again, 13 years in, we become a little more settled 13 years in. So I love engaging with people who are 3 months in and 6 months in and hearing from them like, hey, what is your view of the city? How are you even able to find a church? I think I'm always intrigued by how people, when they move in, how do they find a church? And some have lived here a long time before they even need one or want one. But I am figuring out like, how do I speak the language of Jesus to San Francisco? And then what is the language San Francisco is speaking? And I think having a posture of both is so important. The language of culture, to understand any culture you're in, is awareness, attentiveness. I mentioned that earlier. And what I mean by that is it's being in a place where if you let's just say we flew to Tokyo today. I've never been to Tokyo, but we're in Tokyo. Just simply by paying attention to culture, you can pick up on how you need to order from a restaurant or how to navigate public transportation, just simply by paying attention. So understanding and learning the language of a city like New York, Tokyo, San Francisco, I think the best way to do it is simply just by paying attention. And I think the language of Christ is prayer. I think a lot of what we have experienced in our city, I think the favor and trust we've gained with business leaders and city leaders and even our next door neighbors has just come from John Stott talked about this principle, this art of double listening, where you can be both listening to a fellow San Franciscan and at the same time be listening to what the Holy Spirit is saying. And I think letting that navigate the conversation. Carey, I remember when we first moved here, and the people, of course, this would make sense. The people that are stepping into our church have Ivy League degrees and are, working at these, the big five here in the Bay Area, and just being overwhelmed a little bit with like, what are we doing here? Like, God, why us? With our little education and with our small yes on the table, God, why us? And I would often tell Ben just that they need a shepherd. They need someone to guide them into truth and guide them, because so much of what I would describe in our context, and this is probably describing a lot of progressive cities, is that people just want to create their own value system. They want to pick and choose what they want to believe and then just kind of form their own way of life, their own rule of life. And I think, one question I'll ask people that I'm getting to know is how's that working for you? How is your formation of your own beliefs and what you want to be true? How is that working for you? And I think just having this presence in our city, and I can say this for a dozen church plants that are thriving in San Francisco, that we just want to be a church that's here for you when you get to the end of yourself. And you realize, I need a family. I need a place of belonging. I need something more rooted and more true than what I've been putting my faith in.
Has that been your approach throughout? Because that's very interesting. I mean, that's basically like, the stereotype. Because I don't think what you're dealing with is fundamentally different than the Canadian context that I've been in, because spirituality is something we define for ourselves, right? The number of people who are truly atheist is small. It might be higher actually in Silicon Valley, but generally it's low double digits. 10, 15% of people think of themselves as atheists. Others say I'm very spiritual, but it's a self-defined spirituality.
Yeah.
And I love your like, how's that working for you? What are you discovering when you ask people that question? How is it working for you?
Yeah, you were asking me, what was it? Was that our approach maybe when we first moved here, and how has that even shifted today? And I think, again, just this posture of learning. I remember sitting at the soccer complex. One of our kids had a practice, and I remember just engaging with someone there. And back then, I would get such sweaty palms when people asked why we lived in the city, what we moved here to do. It's a very common question. People are not here long, so it's very common to ask someone what they do here. And I remember not only did she know what church was or God, she's like, I don't know who Jesus is. And so just like, wow, like 30-something years, I've never had to explain who Jesus is to someone and just being caught off guard. And at the same time, I find it so refreshing to be able to figure out my faith alongside of people that don't even believe what I believe. So there have been some rubs of like, why do I believe that? That I just assumed it for so long. Why do I believe that? I remember talking to a girl I have the pleasure of mentoring. She lives in New York. And I remember when she moved from the South into the city, and I'm old enough to be her mom, but I remember when she moved up there were just a lot of things that she began to question about her faith system in God that just were really challenged by the cultural system of New York. And I think she found it refreshing, me just being a few years ahead of her living in San Francisco, is just this like, hey, it's okay to wrestle with your faith. I think for so long, living in the Bible Belt, I just assumed it, I believed it, I received it, I didn't question it. And I think living in a place where I am still figuring out my faith. So when I ask someone, hey, tell me how that's going for you, I speak from a place of, I'm still figuring out my faith. I'm still growing in my faith. It's been a journey for me. There's things that maybe I assumed about God that just weren't true. So I think posing it in such a way that I haven't arrived, posing it in such a way that, hey, I would love for you to come to church with me or come to Alpha with me. But from this perspective and this heart set of, I'm still growing in my faith. I've got a lot to learn. Would you come learn? You want to come learn with me? And again, because of the nature of a progressive city, we're always looking for answers. We're looking for something better. We're looking for something that really could revolutionize how I do life. And so people are on a search. In a progressive city, people are on a search. And I think what's refreshing about planting a church in downtown San Francisco, as opposed to planting it in, a one-person culture or a one languaged culture, is that it brings a refreshment of people are looking, people are searching, and to be able to create something in your city that goes against how the culture goes, it is a challenge. For sure, it is a challenge, but it's also refreshing to be able to build something and create something and help something become sustainable that ends up being a gift to your city. We were with a group of pastors yesterday and just talking about this idea that a healthy, thriving church really seems to make it in hard places because it's so countercultural.
It's interesting that you said, the context in which you were raised, where it's just, this is what I believe, this is who I am, believe it, that settles it. If you were to go into San Francisco with that attitude, what do you predict would happen?
You're not going to make it.
Yeah.
Just call it a vacation and go back to what we call Previousville. You're not going to make it. You won't. And that's not to say we didn't have those thoughts in moving out here. But I think anyone who really is wanting to move into a place, again, comparing this to the Bible Belt, it's you really have to throw those things out. I wrote in Love Where You Live that almost just this dumpster that would come out in front of our apartment building once a week and would get all the trash from the street. Almost just me like dumping out all the ways we had done ministry. Like, let me just throw it out and just take to the streets today. Be a learner of our city. Treat the city as a playground. God, what is it that you're doing here? Where are you stirring? Make my heart sensitive to that. And Carey, just a little bit of context. I grew up as a pastor's kid. So I feel like not only was it just ingrained in me as a Christian in the South, it was ingrained in me as a ministry kid in the South. And my early heroes were missionaries as we would host them. And I'm thinking, I want to go and do what they're doing in their part of the world, never imagining that God would send us to a global city in the United States. And so much of my heart just really comes out of that dream I had as a child of being on mission for God in a place just very different from how I was raised. And so Yeah, I'm living the dream here.
So I'd like to break that down a little bit more and explore why that approach won't work. Because I think, first of all, I agree with you. Secondly, I think we're almost seeing that play out a little bit in the culture wars right now. The culture war is such a big term, but if you look at certain strata of the culture wars, some of it is, I told you this is the truth. You need to believe it. I'm coming for you. And I'm going to say it louder in the hopes that saying it louder means you're going to hear it. And you're saying that approach in San Francisco would have you exiting very quickly. I agree. Same with Canada. Same with a lot of places. But I think the question that maybe needs to be answered for some people who think, no, I just have to get louder and I have to be more forceful. Help us understand why that approach doesn't work in a progressive post-Christian culture.
Well, a progressive culture has gone so far. And just when they think they've gone far enough, they want to go further. And I think to be able to give someone, this is what you're doing wrong. You're seeing it wrong. You're living it wrong. This is not going to work. You've just lost favor with that person. You've just lost the ability to be heard in that moment. And I think, and I might be wrong on this, Carey, but I think a progressive mindset, the one thing that's often not present in a progressive mindset is love. And I think for us as believers, engaging with the progressive culture, to put on love catches this culture by surprise. I think to put on love and to listening is such a lost art. It catches people off guard when you just want to hear, hey, tell me about those beliefs. Tell me why you're engaged in that hobby or being a part of that political campaign or getting to do that at your work. I think just having this posture of, I want to listen to you. And again, this takes time. I know this takes time. And I think, and being just wired like an evangelist, a lot of times I think, we don't have time for this. We don't have time for this. But I think what I'm seeing just create not only a ripple effect in conversations with our culture, but also taking root here. And that is really just, again, being counterculture and choosing to engage by asking questions and by listening and having this posture of, I'm not here to tell you how I've figured it all out, but I would love to hear you. And I think I'm thinking of people I've even engaged with in the past few days, that to be doing life with them is such a key piece of what I believe is often missing in the church and missing among believers. And I think that, there was a time where I would just even try to keep up just mentally, like, these are the people that I'm engaged with here in my city, and this is where I'm at in my relationships with them. And they were not all moving at the same pace. They were all not like, I'm going to invite all of them to church. I was at different places in my relationships with all of them. But I share this example to say, if it were just me, that would be one thing. But we're in a city where there are some thriving churches, and there's more believers in this city in 2024 than were here in 2010. And you take those kinds of engagements, those kinds of conversations, it's going to make a difference in our city. And we talk often with pastors, a mega church of 1,000 people in a city here in the United States, as opposed to a church in San Francisco that's reaching 200 people. It's get the right 200 people in the room. And these are the ones who are leading those startups, leading these companies that are making global impact. I think back to even I remember our prospectus that we were giving out to churches who we were asking, hey, would you consider supporting us for our first 3 years? And just being able to put the stats and the companies that were in San Francisco. And our hope and prayer is that people that worked in those places were going to attend our church. And I love to say that they are. To the right of me can be, a lady who is unhoused and is moving from shelter to shelter week by week. To the other side of me is someone who is helping our country's defense strategy. And we all three can be worshiping in the same space, in a city where the news and media would say this city, has gone to hell. And we can sit here and tell you stories of like, no, there is a growing number of Christians. That number is growing every week. And while, yes, we are a progressive city, I love and I'm so encouraged by people like Mark Sayers and N.T. Wright and Stephen Foster, who really encourage my way of thinking that we're moving almost from post-Christian culture to pre-Christian culture.
Right.
And we're engaging with people who would say they don't even have a relative who's a Christian. They're not engaged in any conversation about faith during the week. And so it gives us an opportunity as the church in progressive cities to really be working with a blank slate. We're not dealing so much with deconstruction as we are getting to work with new builds.
Yes. I've heard it as described sometimes, pre-Christian or post-Christian. In other words, we're past the post-Christian and now we're on a generation that doesn't know. But what I love about this is it's such a different take than the woke, anti-woke. Because if you just show up, it's like, these people are woke and I'm not. I mean, the door slams immediately in that. And that's what's happening across a lot of the dialogues. So I appreciate the nuance and the personal touch you bring. I want to talk about intellect. I had the rather disconcerting experience recently when I delivered a sermon on AI and relationships to learn after the third service that the head of AI for a major tech firm, international company, was sitting in the front row. And she came up to have a conversation with me after about AI. And I'm like, oh, fact check. It turned out to be a great conversation. And she was very sympathetic to the message and everything. But I imagine, anti-intellectualism is also something that I'm very concerned about in the church. And that's why I try to bring thoughtful conversations to the space. I imagine that you have to be fact-checked and be able to engage in some pretty deep conversations as well that are not just emotional, but intellectual, because you're dealing with some of the smartest people, as you indicated, in the world at your doorstep. Thoughts on that, or how to approach that as church leaders?
Yeah. We've got a great teaching team here. Fortunately, a few times a year, I really try to veer away from that and stick to more of what I know and what I feel confident in speaking on. But you're exactly right, Carey. We're speaking to an audience that are so much more smarter than we are. And the things that they're engaged with on the weekly, I mean, I would have to Google even just some of the words that they mention in a conversation with me. I think what we really are, or what's important, and again, I think this touches even on that post-Christian and pre-Christian way we're in, and that is, while they might be highly intellectual, the one thing that we know our people need in the city of San Francisco is a grounding of their faith and why they believe what they believe. So much of our weekly messages really have to do with spiritual formation and spiritual disciplines and just the basics of Christianity. Not that we're not growing in that, but so many people we know that they're coming into the church really because we've got just so many new Christians that are here. In terms of like speaking into those hard intellectual conversations, I don't know if we're like running into that space here in the city. At the same time, we are also creating a center of sacred vocation where we really are allowing those who are in those particular fields and really getting really niche on this, those who are in those particular fields to be able to have those conversations with others. One
smart,
really fun thing that we do here occasionally is just opening up a night of the week where we're like, hey, come and network here. You can network anywhere in the city, at any coffee shop and third space here, but come network here in the church space. And it's been really fun to see a lot of our young professionals amazed because they know who's in the room. They've read that person's article. They've seen that person on TV. They've listened to that person on a podcast, and they're shocked to see that person inside of a church space. So it's maybe more than anything, it's how do we bring those people into a room to have those kinds of conversations where faith is the dominant conversation.
Yeah, that's really a fascinating approach, to create the kind of space where they can connect. And the church is a great leveler, right? Like if you think about the hierarchy of corporations, there's a lot of people's like, yeah, I'll never get a conversation with X or with Y. But that's cool that you've created that kind of community. Any other tips or thoughts, do's or don'ts, for people looking to either plant or make a difference in a culture that's changing rapidly? Any thoughts you want to share?
Well, there's so much. I look back and I would say so much of our journey really just goes back to who God has made us to be. And not trying to be like another church planter or that we have to do it a certain way. Again, 2010, there was no playbook for how to do this. So much of it was just putting one foot in front of the other. One thing I would really encourage anyone who's considering church planting to do is to build friendships with other pastors in that area. Seek out those friendships and have this heart posture of, we're not going to go in and do it by ourselves. It's not going to be our church that reaches the city, but really to build those friendships with other pastors. That's still just a huge part of our ministry and our calling in San Francisco, to be welcoming those who are coming in, and at the same time to really honor and respect those who went before us. I think this is just a big part of those who are considering, stepping into that church space and wanting to plant a church.
Great. Well, you've got a new book called Translating Jesus. Mark Batterson wrote the foreword. I had the privilege of endorsing it, and it will give a slightly different take on what we've discussed today, right? How to really get the gospel across in a culture that doesn't understand it. Anything you want to say about the book?
Well, Carey, first, thanks for putting your endorsement on there. I am delighted. Yeah, just delighted that several leaders in around the globe who are leading in progressive cities, they're leading in urban context, would support this book. But Translating Jesus, it really is a book that helps you talk to Jesus about your people and talk to your people about Jesus. And I try to just lay out some principles that really can work in any context, of just really kind of helping you start at the starting line of remembering your story, remembering what God has done for you, coming back to that first love. And when you know who you are in Christ and what He has done for you, I think sometimes we just need to even ask ourselves the question, has being a Christian become a job rather than just this first love with Him? We love because he first loved us. Like, coming back to that, Christianity is not a job. It's a love relationship I have. And because I love Him and He loves me, I want to love one another in the place that God has called me to love. And so I really just lay out some various principles from what to do with open doors and closed doors, and different ways that you can share your faith. And you don't have to be great at sharing your faith to share your faith.
Well, this has been a refreshing conversation. Shauna, where can people find you online these days?
Yeah, my website is shaunapilgreen.com, and sometimes I'll hop onto Instagram at Shauna Pilgreen.
All right. Shauna, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carey. I appreciate it.